If I had been the referee, I would have looked for an excuse to not throw him out. Wolves 114, Spurs 109, and the final 2.5 quarters of the game occurred in the absence of Victor Wembanyama, who was ejected for a flagrant 2 foul, elbowing Naz Reid. What did you think of what went down there?
I'll start with this. I think that the call was appropriate, and flagrant 2s need to be a big thing, but that was an aggressive swing of the elbow that could cause a real injury. And so first of all, in the early part of it, I thought, oh man, even if how hard Wembanyama swung that elbow, even if he didn't see Naz Reid, then I think it still would have been deserved. But because you could have felt him, it's the risk or potential risk for injury. But there was one of those alternate views, which I think was partially used to show Dylan Harper's reaction to Wembanyama's elbow, where you see Wembanyama check a little bit out of the side of his eye, and I think he saw that something was there. So I have zero problem with that being an ejection. There's a real risk for injury. It's also just so unnecessary. I'm sympathetic a little bit to Wembanyama on the base because I'll talk a little bit about how this game was officiated in terms of the glass. But that still doesn't give you a free license to just throw your arms around like you're Karl Malone.
Yeah, it was definitely a pretty vicious elbow. And as soon as I saw the replay, I'm like, yeah, I think he's probably going to get ejected for this, even though he is a superstar. I do think, though, that the referees share some culpability in this. And again, I will reiterate, what he did was worthy of a flagrant 2. If I had been the referee, I would have looked for an excuse to not throw him out, though. And I'm not sure I agree with you of like, oh, he saw him, he was like trying to hurt him or something like that. Clearly, there was a wild swing with elevated physicality, and you're responsible for what you do when you do something like that. But he just got mauled on that play. And it's not to say, I don't know what was going through his mind. You can never know that. But having been in that situation as a player and having talked to players and talked to referees about these sorts of circumstances, we talk a lot about the referees feeling like they need to get control of the game. And I think they do that a little bit too aggressively at times. But and we've seen this a lot on live calls too, that is something that a way that a lot of players react if there's a situation, particularly if they have the ball, when guys are just following them and it's not being called, you feel like, oh, they're not calling this. I need to do something extreme here to make sure I maintain the ball. And so Jaden McDaniels is hitting Victor Wembanyama a couple of times. Then he even has his left arm grabbed with 2 hands by the end. So Victor actually had his both his arm. He was only able to had one hand available to hold the ball. And so he's trying to turn away from McDaniels. And he obviously swung his elbow pretty hard, but he was certainly feeling like at that point, hey, he's got my one arm. They're not calling a foul. The only way I'm going to get away with the ball is to turn very violently. And he certainly did that in an out of control manner and deserves the consequences for that. But the reality is, if the referees had called any one of those obvious fouls, we're not in this situation. And so there is some culpability there. Now, does that mean that he should have only got a flagrant 1 because of that? Because he was being fouled so much they didn't call it? And that is a natural reaction that some players have. Now, a lot of times it's not going to rise to the level of an elbow like that, but that's why referees need to call fouls, because players always react that way. If fouls aren't called, they are going to be like, well, all right, I got to just be more physical then and react even more physically. So again, like, it clearly met the definition of a flagrant 2. If I were refereeing that game and I saw that I had missed these calls like that and somebody's grabbing his other arm the whole time, I would have maybe tried to find a way to be more lenient. I'm not sure, given how severe it was, that was possible. But there is, I think if I were a referee there, I would, even if I had to throw him out by the letter of the law and I couldn't really get around it, which I'm not really sure they could have, honestly, as I think about it and look at it more, I would feel bad that I fucked up and it led to this, that I could have avoided this if I had done my job correctly.
I agree with all that. I think you phrased it well. And I will just add that my stance is not that Wembanyama did it intentionally. I'd say that I'm not sure whether he did or he didn't. And there was more of a possibility. I thought he did it blind at first. And I'm like, he did kind of. That's just as a point of clarification. I agree with you. But the problem, it's sort of in a similar circumstance to when a player or a coach gets a technical on a call that eventually gets reversed, where in the current structure, you can't fix the initial mistake. And in this sort of a circumstance, because it was deeply connected with the other thing, but it is it's not like it was sort of a separate action. I don't think there was a good way. I was wondering if there was going to be a way they were going to do, because they've gotten creative in their accounting sometimes with Draymond Green of like, oh, well, but they couldn't adjudicate it this way. Like there was actually a preceding foul. So instead it's a technical or something like that. But I don't think there was really a mechanism to use there that I'm
No.
familiar with. And so because they hadn't stopped play. So they couldn't do that, say, well, we would have stopped play. And so it's unfortunate for the Spurs. And I mean, and we both said parts of the same thing. And like you mentioned this specific play, but also just the entire game.
Well, before we move on real quickly, I mean, what I would say I'd probably have modified my take at least a little bit for this pod. I initially tweeted it, got a lot of people really angry. Now, those reactions were absurd because I said he's fully responsible. He lost control. But I also pointed out that the referees could have avoided it. And probably the one thing I said on Twitter that I would maybe modify here would be to say that if I could have made it a flagrant one, I would have. But as the referee, I mean, I just don't, there's probably not really a way to do that, honestly. It just was so obviously fits the criteria for a flagrant 2. I mean, if that's not a flagrant 2, I'm not sure what is at this point. So
exactly.
And to say, oh, well, because that's just not in the rules. So, I mean, there would be no way to do it. I mean, I think just from kind of a moral standpoint, I think, I would have been okay with a flagrant 1 because of that is probably a better way to say it, but I certainly don't think it was wrong for it to be a flagrant 2. But I mean, do you disagree with me in that? Because I know a lot of people, again, plenty of nuance can be lost when you're tweeting something in the heat of the moment, but a lot of people were very pissed off about that, and probably most of my support came with a whatever the San Antonio area code is attached to it.
So I would have been okay with it on the sense of like the overall basketball justice part of it, but Sunday was not a day for basketball justice. We'll get into the other part of that later on.
So you're going to start talking about just the overall physicality, because that's something that Mitch Johnson highlighted after it too. He went a little bit far as well, because he talked about, well, he's going to do something to defend himself. That's not the route I would have gone. I would have gone more the route that I did of like, hey, if guys are going to be physical, like you have to be physical back, and like he took it too far or something like that. As opposed like that he's actively defending himself. I wouldn't want it to go to that level, but
he's defending himself like Bart and Lisa in that episode of The Simpsons where they're swinging their arms. That happens to hit you. I'm defending myself.